Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is Sonship Establishment Part 3, and this is Session 4. We left off looking at that statement in Romans 8, if God be for, that question, if God be for us, who could be against us? And I was trying to show you that it's not enough just to be able to answer that question, but you have to be able to say why that is answered the way that it is. And let me tell, and now, I don't know, I feel like I need to set myself on fire and juggle chainsaws while they're running so that everybody will have sufficient, after all that homemade ice cream. This is rough.
Let's don't have it anymore.
Oh, no. We need to be disciplined enough to be able to go through that. Blasphemy. I'm just talking, Bertha. It's just preaching. It's not, okay. Let me tell you why you have to be able to say why. Because the full persuasion that creates the unwavering confidence in your Father and His curriculum cannot be produced in you until you can answer the why of those questions. All 5 of these questions. But in fact, take a look with me, because here's how Paul's going to end it. Take a look at verse 38. For I am persuaded. There's a persuasion that has taken place based on the things he has said to you prior. That's where that's going. Now, yes, he is persuaded of something in particular. It covers the last 2 verses in the chapter. But that persuasion isn't just, well, I've got this in my mind. He has been persuaded by what has been written. Everybody with me there? And because of what he understands, it produced a full persuasion, no shadow of a doubt with him. That's what your Father wants to get done with you. And so to get that done, He's going to explain to you the whys and the hows of this, and you've got to be able to know that. Now,
isn't it true though that you asked that question before in 31 and it's not being answered until 38, right?
Yeah, in 31, I'm going to repeat that because the folks on the DVD, they go crazy because they can't hear the question. You're saying the question that's asked in 31 doesn't really get answered until 38. That's what you're saying. I'm going to tweak that a little bit. We're going to see it, but let me answer it for you, okay? Here's what's going to happen. If I do this, I'm giving you the answer to a question I want to ask you later. Bud is so crafty. He pulls stuff out of you. All right, look, I'll just give it to you. We got through 26 and 27. You're going to start in 28. 28, 29, and 30 make a statement. Actually, the statement gets made in 28, and 29 and 30 show you the truth of the statement. They're reinforcing the truth of that statement. Then, in 31, all the way, I'm not going to give you the end of that one because I'm going to have you look at it. But starting in 31, where you get these questions, now this is where this gets a little tricky, but just follow me. These questions all get answered out of the information that was already given to you. Look at, let me back you up. Look at 31. See what the first question is? He just said 28, 29, and 30, and then read verse 31. What shall we then say to these things? See how he's referring you back to what he just told you? Now those questions that follow are all in the context of those 3 verses. That's why you can't answer this If God be for us, who can be against us? Well, nobody, because God's a big God, and that has to be answered out of something that was told to you in those 3 previous verses. That's how you'll know the why. That's how you'll know the how. Do you at least get that part? I know we haven't done it, but I'm just... Did that confuse anybody? You're just not going to tell me, are you? Okay. All right. So, does that make sense, Bud?
Yeah, that's the part I don't understand. I haven't been able to understand it, 28, 29, and 30. Those are the Calvinist verses. You know what I mean?
That's what is perceived to be the... Right, thank you. Right, those are... In fact, we're going to address that. Those are perceived to be the Calvinist verses. And there may be someone here that says, I'm not sure what that is, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But as we go through this, in fact, here's what I'd like for us to do. I think this would be a good idea. Let's just fly over the chapter and take a look at some of this, because Bud's bringing up a point that's very pertinent to what we're looking at here. So let's just take these verses and kind of run through this. Verse 38. I did that one. Sorry. Okay. Oh, you know what? This is what I wanted to tell you before I do that. There's something that God is doing in all of this, and He doesn't... This is one of those things He doesn't name until He gets over to Corinthians. He's enlarging your heart. Now, certainly not in the physical sense. In the physical sense, if you get an enlarged heart, you have medical problems. But in the spiritual sense, when your heart is enlarged, it means it has a greater capacity to do the things that are supposed to be there. And he uses that very term. Look with the Corinthians. He says, O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open unto you, our heart is enlarged. That's really what this part of Romans 8 is going to start doing for you. It's going to give you a greater capacity for some things that's going to enlarge your heart. That's just a term that Paul uses. Not important for you to memorize that right now, but in fact, Paul doesn't even talk about it in Romans 8, although that's the very thing that is going on. Okay, I just wanted to kind of bring that up. Now, let me take you over, and let's just take a look at Romans 8, 28, and look at this. And we know that all things work together for good, to them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose. For whom He did foreknow, He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom He did predestinate, them He also called, and whom He called, them He also justified, and whom He justified, them He also glorified. Now, this is the section that I was just telling you about, 28 to 30. I was going to ask you to just read through that chapter and tell me where you thought it cut off, because this is actually divided into 3 parts. This third section is divided into 3 parts. The first part is 28, 29, and 30. 28 is that verse that you have probably, if you've been in church, you've heard that verse over and over again. Folks have memorized that verse. They put it on refrigerator magnets and stuck it on the refrigerator. It's on the bumper sticker on their car. And they quote it all the time. But I'm telling you that what you've been taught about that verse isn't right. You're not reading that verse right. I'm going to tell you how folks, I'm going to tell you how they read it, but I want you to look at it first. And we know, first of all, there's something to that. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God. Just take that first part. They read that as though it says, God is working all things together for our good. Isn't that the way everybody sees that? And you know what that means? That God is working events so that they all come together ultimately for your good. That's a Calvinistic thought. God is not orchestrating events. To see that, that's not even what that says. Next of all, let me ask you this. What is God using all things work together for good? What is God using for good? Gloria says us. Anybody else?
Furtherance of our learning.
Okay. Oh, see, okay. Randall cut through all of the side issues that I thought you'd go through to get right on the target here. What do we normally think of? When does someone quote this verse? When do you hear someone say, well, all things work together for good? When do you always hear that? When do you hear it? When something bad happens. But did the verse say, for we know that all bad things work together? It didn't say good or bad, did it? It just said what? All things. We always look at it, though, like it's only talking about the bad things. Then why didn't it say bad? Or detrimental? Or problematic? It didn't. See, that's how much we don't understand this verse. We think this is the verse that we call out or stand on or claim or whatever when something bad happens. It said all things. Well, let me ask you this. If something good happens, do you say, well, all things work together for good? You got a raise at work. Let's do Audie. I love to pick on Audie. He goes to work, he gets a raise. He comes home and he says to Kim, I got a raise. Is Kim going to say, well, all things work together for good? Probably, she probably won't. Please tell me. Okay, she probably won't. She just wants to go shopping. Okay. Well, Audie has a different set of problems. Okay. Only if bad things happen. If he comes home and goes, well, I got a cut in pay. Well, all things work together for good. And then we invent a scenario. Let me give you an example. You're driving along, your car breaks down. And you go, well, all things work together for good. So then you know what you have to do? You have to dream up a way that this is now good. So you know what? You make up a story that you can't prove, and you do it like this. You know why God had my car break down? Because it saved me from being in an accident. Or to teach me a lesson. Yeah, we're always inventing a way. But you know, you're guessing when you do that. And now I'm going to take you back to what I told you a while ago. You have to know the why. You have to know why all things work together for good. Not for you to invent it and not for you to guess it. And guess what? It's found right there. But listen, I'm going to tell you this. You may not believe it yet, but verse 28 kind of just drops on you. Boom. It's a statement. All things work together for good to them that love God and are the called according to His purpose. Boom! Now listen what I'm going to say now. If all you were given was verse 28, you cannot know why that's true. You have to have 29 and 30. Because if you don't have 29 and 30, yes, you were told something and you may believe it, but you don't know why it's true. You don't know how that works. And you've got to know the why in order for that to work in you. Are you with me on that? So as we look at these things that are there, and by the way, there's some other things. Look at verse 29. Well, at the end of verse 28, let's finish that. To them who are the called according to His purpose. Now you have theologians going, we have to discover God's great purpose. And now they're going to go back and they're going to try to pull that up. And then they fly into 29. For whom He did foreknow. Now we're talking about the foreknowledge of God. Wait a minute. What do you know about the Father-Son relationship? There's what happens to the attribute of omniscience in the Father-Son relationship? It is set aside. So what's he talking about? For whom He did foreknow. See, okay, now, That's fine, that's fine. For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate. Now, this is where Bud was talking about the Calvinists. They really love to grab hold of this because predestination. For those of you that do not know, I'm just going to give you a real brief. There is an acronym called TULIP that carry the 5 main points of Calvinism. Calvinism is named after a man named John Calvin. He was one of the reformers back when we were coming out of the Dark Ages and the Catholic Church was issuing all of its, John Calvin along with Martin Luther and some others, they were reformers. In other words, they came to the understanding that salvation was not by your works, but it was by grace. But they still had a lot of other stuff hanging on to them. They still baptized babies. Where'd they get that? They got that out. They were Catholic. They came up in the Catholic Church. Well, I don't want to get into the Reformation and all, but they came up with something that actually was a pendulum swing to the other side of Catholicism. And so here are the tenets of that. The first one is total. The T stands for total depravity. Now, you would look at that and say, total depravity means I can't save myself. Well, that would be true. You can't save yourself. The only way to save yourself is to live a perfect, sinless life. Is that possible for us? No. We're born with a sin nature. It's impossible. But the Calvinist takes that further. He says total depravity is you not only can't save yourself, you can't even ask God to save you until after He's done it. God has to save you, and then, only then, do you even know you need to be saved. And here's how they illustrate it. A man is drowning, and when he drowns and slips below the waters, someone pulls him out, performs CPR, he spits the water out, and his first words as he comes to is, "Save me." He's still thinking he's drowning. Well, there's a problem with that illustration because he was hollering, "Save me," before he went under the waves. But the Calvinist says, see, we can't even ask God to save us until He saves us, and because we're so depraved, we won't even ask Him to save us. Now that's true Calvinist doctrine. Here's the second one. By the way, isn't it funny that no one ever gets saved except we're in the middle of a gospel presentation? That seems like a coincidence, doesn't it? I mean, if God's just arbitrarily saving them, how come a guy's never just driving along telling a joke and then suddenly the other guy goes, "I just got saved"? That doesn't happen. Well, anyway. Let's see. Let me just write these out. Okay. The U is unmerited favor. You and I would look at that and say, we don't deserve to be saved. That would be true. There's nothing about you that deserves salvation. But this one is hooked very closely to the next one, which is limited atonement. And the Calvinist takes these and says this: you not only don't deserve to be saved, and because you don't deserve to be saved, God is not under obligation to save anyone. So what He did in His limited atonement is He picked who would be saved, and Christ only died for them. He did not die for the rest of the world. Only for those He picked. So it would be, even if a guy, and you say, well, so a guy would call on the Lord to save him, and God would go, sorry, didn't pay for yours? And the Calvinists would say, no, because he can't even call on God until after God has saved him. So he'll never call on God. You see how they've got this system working. So the limited atonement and the unmerited favor work together to say, okay, it's like this. We're all deserving of the lake of fire. We're all sinners. God's not obligated to save anybody. But if He chooses to reach out and save Ruby, God's not the bad guy because He didn't save the rest of you. He wasn't obligated to save any of you. It's unmerited. God, you don't deserve any of it. So if He just saves her, you can't complain. You got what you deserved. He just helped her. That's the way that they would explain that. Irresistible grace says, if God picked you, you will be saved no matter what. God is going to save you. It's irresistible. You cannot say no. And the last one is perseverance of the saints. I love this one. Perseverance of the saints. You and I would call that eternal security. Once we're saved, we will always be in a saved condition. We're once saved, always saved. The Calvinist says perseverance of the saints is once you get saved, you will now live like you're saved. And if you ever don't live like you're saved, then guess what? You weren't really saved. You're one of the tares, they would say, going back to the parables in the Gospels, because Calvinists do not know how to rightly divide the Word. So here you have a guy that can't call on God to save him. He doesn't deserve anything. God may or may not pick him. If He does pick him, he's going to be saved. And if he's saved, he's going to live like it. And if you don't live like it, well, guess what? Then you never were saved. Now that produces a lot of confusion. Do you know why? Because then you have to make sure that every day you actually live the way you're supposed to live. And here's what you know in your heart of hearts. That the areas where you fail, that no one may see but you, makes you wonder if you're really saved. Which is why when I was pastoring in Glen Rose, there was a man at Emmanuel Baptist Church who was a Calvinist there. And one Sunday morning after pastoring there for years, stood up in front of his congregation and said, Bob, you remember this, I got saved this week. And I need to be baptized. Hello, Israel. And if you want me to step down, I will. Or if you want me to remain on as your pastor, I will, but it'll be up to you. Now here's what I'm thinking. Let's suppose he really wasn't saved. Do you really think that years of unsaved service qualifies you to pastor? I can't even believe you're asking that question. If you really believe you weren't saved, here's what you should do. Step down and learn. You really think that 10 years of pastoring as a lost man qualifies you to lead an assembly? Wow! This is an easy gig to get, isn't it? It's just like some athlete or movie star that gets saved. You know what? People make them an instant authority. They have no clue. They voted to keep him. Oh, yeah, we'll just keep you. I thought, man. Now, the truth of the matter is, he would disagree with me. I believe he was already saved. But his Calvinist theology made him doubt because he wasn't. Here's what I'm wondering, 5 years later down the road, is he going to be back in the same boat again? Because he's not going to be able to overcome sin anymore. There's only one power that can help you overcome sin. That's the power of God's grace. And Calvinism is a long ways from grace. I know they call it grace. In fact, many Calvinistic churches have grace in their name because they love grace. Springs of grace and all that kind of business. Because they're saying, because we didn't deserve it, God in His grace reached out. But I have to tell you that living for God is anything but a grace program with the Calvinists. It's a law program. So don't kid yourself.
Being in a Baptist church like that would be an oxymoron.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would.
Calvinists and saying that you believe once saved, always saved.
That's right. What did you say, Bertha?
I remember as a little girl, when the Calvinists started a church in our town, they were top down. You know, they wanted to believe. They did not want them set up in their town.
Is that right?
They did not understand. They say, oh, that's a bunch of Calvinists. We do not need them. But I never understood. Even in college, it doesn't go and it explains it like this.
There was a Grace Church in Canada that was actually involved in sonship, and it got to this point in Romans 8, and the Calvinists in the congregation tore the church apart, and it never went any further. Now that has happened in the last 10 years.
Isn't that what's wrong with all these grace, rightly dividing groups?
Calvinism?
Yeah.
There is a lot of Calvinism out there. There is.
That's why they won't fall into sonship, right?
To some degree. The other is they cannot bring themselves to believe that there's anything sitting back in the Old Testament that they would refer to at all. But the thing is, when Paul talks about certain issues, if you don't know what that's about, he's talking to you about something you don't have any clue about. You know, he doesn't define everything, but it's defined. But again, we've been real careful. We're not getting Israel's doctrine, but Paul's not going to the trouble to reinvent the wheel every time, like the searching of the heart thing. He didn't explain that at all. He's counting on the fact that you already know that. How many times, too, does Paul say, as it is written? And then he quotes something from back in Israel's program. See, Paul wasn't afraid to do that. Paul wasn't creating doctrine out of Israel's program, but he was certainly aware of everything in there. Problem with a lot of grace churches today is it's Paul's 13 epistles and that's it. And Randall brought me a paper today, I think I've already put it in my Bible, with 3 pages. Is it 3 or is it front and back? No, it's front and back, isn't it? Wow. This is 6 pages of verses. It says we have to rightly divide Paul's epistles, and it's got 6 pages of verses here that they all say pertain to Israel only.
Yeah, and that's just in,
This is just 3 chapters in the book of Romans. He's got 6 pages of verses. Romans 9, 10, and 11. That's wild. So, yeah, there's a pendulum swing. There's an extreme to everything. And I didn't really want to turn this into that, but what I'm trying to show you is when you're going through these terms, boy, the theologians love Romans 8, especially this part right here, because they got all these terms about God's purpose, foreknowledge, predestination. So let's just read verse 29 again. For whom He did foreknow, He also did predestinate to be saved, to be conformed to the image of His Son. That's a different deal. Calvinist doesn't talk about you're predestined to be saved. That's a whole different deal. But I have a bigger shocker for you coming than that. That He might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, there's a connecting word, isn't it? Moreover, whom He did predestinate, them He also called, and whom He called, them He also justified, and whom He justified, them He also glorified. What's missing? Sanctification. Why? Because you're in it. He went from justification to glorification. There's the 3, justification, sanctification, glorification. You're in sanctification. He didn't have to mention it. That's what you're actually in. But when he does all of these, now listen carefully, I'm going to tell you this, and I'll have to prove it to you as we go through. The theologians look at all these terms and they write these big books. When I went to school, we went through Thiessen's Systematic Theology. And that's a book about that thick, and that book is so dry. When you open it up, it's just, chokes you down. You read that, your eyes glaze over. You look like Bob Butler after he ate ice cream in the first session. Your eye, or Randy, your eyes roll back in your head and you just go unconscious. You know, this systematic theology is so, but here's my point. They write all this stuff about this. What's being talked about right here? An earthly father does with his own earthly son. This doesn't have a thing in the world to do with God's omnipotence, His great power, His manipulating of circumstances, Him choosing people to be saved. You're going to see this is still in the context of your sonship, and a regular, earthly, listen carefully, unsaved dad can do every one of those things with his natural-born son. That's how much we don't understand what's sitting in these verses. That's why when he says, "What shall we then say?" in verse 31, you've just been given this. And when he says, "What shall we then say to these things?" those questions that follow come right out of those three verses, period. If you rip them out of that context to start having a whole different discussion, you have missed the thing that is supposed to instill in you an unwavering confidence in what your Father says and His curriculum is able to produce. Now we're off on a wild tangent somewhere. Can't keep our feet in the context in which we find ourselves when the very next verse tells you where to find those questions. What shall we then say to these things? Okay, I'm a little upset about it, and I'm going to get over it now. But it just drives me nuts that this is where we go when we teach the Bible. All right. Let me get on over here because we're running out of time. Wow, we're running out of time. When you look at these verses, I know I have some things to talk with you about here. You do understand that when you talk about, I don't have it all up here, when we talked about that first virtue that was in Romans chapter 8, verses 16 to 25, and it talks about the creature and all of that. The way the second section on prayer starts is with the word likewise. That tells you that's connected to what you just read, but it's going to be about something different. What does the word likewise mean? Huh? What? Also, okay? Or after the same manner of this. This is real similar, okay? So he's changing subjects. He's changing subjects, but likewise tells you it's not totally disconnected from the previous thing. Now look how this one starts. And we know Now, remember, the things he was just telling you up till there were things that you wouldn't know unless he told you about them, right? Now, he's going to tell you, he's going to change. It's connected. The word "and" connects it, but it also tells you you're fixing to move into something else, something different. Now, look at how this is all in a section. This is how you know these three verses go together. And we know, all right, verse 29, there's that English word of logic, for. This is a for of further explanation. In other words, verse 28 laid something on the table, boom. All things work together for good to them that love God, who are the called according to His purpose. There it is, boom. Verse 29 says, for, now he's going to explain that verse 28, whom He did foreknow, and on it goes. And then in verse 30, moreover, there's the other English word of logic that connects that up. So when you get to verse 31, does anybody remember how that verse started? What shall we then say to these things? Now you're going to go through a second section. Now I sure hope I've got this in the PowerPoint. Oh man. When you look at that, do you see those questions? You might want to just look at it in your notes where you have it all together in one piece instead of just the PowerPoint. Somebody look at that whole section starting in verse 31 through the rest of the chapter and tell me how many questions are in there. Don't think about anything I've said to you before. I'm talking about total. How many questions do you see? Anybody got a number yet? Sandy says 7. Kim? 7. Everybody agree with that? Okay. Why 7? Why do you see 7? What makes you say 7? It's not a trick. It's not a trick. Kim, why do you say 7? There's 7 question marks. That's good, right? Is that what you're thinking, Sandy? Pretty much. In case she's wrong, but I'd tweak mine a little bit. Okay, all right. 7 questions. Now, I want you to look at one of those because I want you to see something that you have to pay attention to. In fact, let me just get you to look at the verse. Look at verse 35. Do you see anything odd about that? Verse 35. You have to pay attention to the way the sentence is constructed. It's not listing who, it's listing what's. Right? There's one thing. What else do you see? What? Yeah. Do you notice that in the middle of that, look, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? The shall is not capitalized. Following that first question mark. That S is a small case S. That is not a mistake. That is actually a technique used in the English language to frame the essence of the question, but the sentence is meant to continue, small case S, so that actually becomes one question. You weren't wrong about 7. I wasn't trying to trick you. Kim's looking at me like, yeah, you made me say it. There are 7 question marks. But what I'm trying to get you to see here is, because that small case S on shall, what you count as 2 questions is really one single question. But the question itself is framed with by the first question mark. So it goes like this. Oh man, let me see if I'm not going to, did I not have it on the PowerPoint? I passed it? Well, no, I thought I had, maybe I was just going to put it on the board. The reason I'm doing that is because what I want you to see is, I want you to see that Romans 8, wait, I should have it. Okay, here we go. Here's the first question. Because what's in the ... is, what shall we then say to these things? That's the setup. It's kind of like this. Have you ever someone said, "Can I ask you one question?" I usually go, "Is that your question?" That doesn't count as the question. That's the setup question, right? So when he says, "What shall we say? What shall we then say to these things?" is not one of the questions. It's the setup. Everybody with me? Here's the first question. If God be for us, who can be against us? We've already done a little work on this. Not much, but you already know. You know what the answer is. You just need to know why that's the answer. Here's the second question. He that spared not his own Son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? This is a favorite for the name it and claim it crowd. He's going to freely give us all things. We can ask for whatever we want. He's going to freely give us all things. Tell you what, ask Him for the winning lottery ticket and see how that works for you. By the way, your prayer chances of being answered will increase with the number of lottery tickets you purchase. Just wanted to say that. This is not about that. Here's the third one. Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? You may know the answer to this question, but you have to know why that is the answer to that question. Here's the next one. Who is he that condemneth? And then the last question, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? And then, of course, that continues, shall, and as Bud pointed out, it wasn't a list of whos, it was a list of whats, shall tribulation or distress or persecution, and goes on to sword. Those 5 questions, folks, and this is all I got time to do because we're out of time. Those 5 questions are the most heart-probing questions you will ever face in your sonship life. They are going to reach down inside of you and produce, they're going to produce a confidence. What I'm really saying is they're going to reach down inside of you and bring you face to face with issues that have to be addressed in your sonship establishment. But before you can answer them, here's how you should see these questions. Let me say it like this. This is your Father asking you. Let me go back. Who is he that condemneth? Do you know what the answer to that is? I know that you're thinking, okay, I can think of several. Who would you think? Give me a possible answer. Who is he that condemneth? Who do you think would condemn you? Satan. Okay. Any other answers? Because there's a bigger one. That's not a wrong answer, but there's a bigger one. The body? Okay. There's a bigger answer than that. That's true. There's a bigger answer. It's the one he's after. It's the one. When we go through it, it's unfair for me now. I'm asking you to dig things out that you haven't studied. But here's what I'm saying. It's you. It's you. You already, you are the one that's being talked about here. And you say, well, I don't really condemn myself. When you understand what's going on with this, you're going to look at this and you're going to realize, have you ever heard this? I'm my biggest problem. That's the issue that's going to be addressed here. He's not going to leave anything out. You said the body, you know what? You could go bigger. You could go the world, he's going to deal with that. Other believers, he's going to deal with that. The devil, he's going to deal with that. And then he's going to say, and go look in the mirror. I'm going to deal with that. There's not going to be anything I'm not going to deal with here. And as we go through this, what you're going to see is, and we're just going to refer to these as the five, I hate to use that word, I wish it was a better word, the five probing questions. That just conjures up ideas I just don't like. It makes me think of alien abductions or something. I just, I'm just not, But these are questions that you're going to answer, though. It's like your Father is asking you these questions, and you're going to have to come up with the answer, but you're going to have to know more than the answer. You're going to have to know why that's the answer. And once you know that, these will work to produce an absolute confidence. You won't have to conjure it up. They will work to produce an absolute confidence in your Father and in the ability of His curriculum to succeed in you. You'll be absolutely assured of that. Then when you go into the education, there won't be any more thoughts about, I don't know if this will work for me. You will know that it will work for you. Now, if you have doubts now, guess what? You haven't gotten to verse 39. But when you get there, you'll say like Paul, I am persuaded. He has removed every vestige of doubt. And there may be something in you that you're not even thinking about that He knows is a chink in the armor. He's going to pull that out. He's going to deal with it and put it to rest so it never becomes an issue for you again. Are you getting an idea that He has geared this for your success? And He wants you to know that. He wants you to know that. Okay, we'll go through this, and we're going to have to go through it carefully, as you can imagine. Any questions?
Where was the Corinthians at when they left, when they bailed out?
They knew about their justification. They knew about their sanctification. They even knew about their sonship. What got them was, before they ever got into the decision-making skills, they saw what was happening to Paul, and Paul said, this is what's going to be waiting for you, and they went, we're out. They're dropped off somewhere in Romans 8. They're somewhere in Romans 8. They knew about sonship. And by the way, they knew they were sanctified, and they knew they were justified, and they were delighted with that. They understood they were under grace. They were delighted with that. But they did not want the sufferings of the policy of evil. They couldn't get away from the sufferings of this present time. Happens to everybody, no matter if you're saved or lost. But when it came to the policy of evil, because the things they wanted was the prestige of being the church in Corinth. They wanted the easy road. They wanted affluence. They wanted everything to work without a problem. And Paul's not saying these things will happen to you. He's saying these are the things that could happen to you. It'll be different. What will happen to you will be different from what happens to Ruby, which will be different from what happens to Milt. And because Satan will look at Milt and he'll go, here's the way for me to bring pressure on him, but it'd be a whole different way for you. And a different way even from that for Bob. And a different way than that for me. And he's going to look and he'll go to work. But here's the thing you have to remember. Don't let that scare you. You won't go through anything that the policy of evil offers up that you will not have first been prepared to go through.
So they didn't go through any suffering.
No, they just saw it in him. And that was enough to make them run for the hills.
Okay, so they didn't lose any of their inheritance since they came back.
Well,
Right?
No, I understand what you're saying. I'm trying to think, I'm going to answer this carefully. Don't think about inheritance. Think about position
Yeah, that's what
in the heavenly places.
that's what I meant.
Yeah. That position was not very far. They're just getting into Romans 8. So there's certainly not going to be a principality, heading up a whole division of the government, because they don't know. They're not a fully educated son. So did they lose inheritance? I'm sorry, did they lose that position? They didn't have much position.
See, the reason why I asked that is because you had mentioned that until we come on the armor of light and we come under the gun of Satan,
Right.
we cannot suffer these things.
That's right. And there's no way to respond to them because you're not right.
We don't know how.
That's right.
And God
So,
protects us.
right. For them, here's what that would have meant. It just meant they throw in the towel. They really, if they go to heaven right then, let's say they die in an earthquake, they're going to hold a position like the other folks in town that didn't know anything because they turned their back on it. Their position will be nullified. Now, what position would they have had? Would they have had a position? They would have had some position. They would have. So they did lose that. But when they came back, see, that's the thing. You can always come back. And if you'll come back, what you know, you will begin to put into practice again. The thing about sonship is like this. Nobody quits sonship but continues to practice the principles of sonship.
I guess what I really meant by that was when they did come back, because they did come back.
They did.
Then
They would have moved right back into where they left off.
yeah, there wasn't a consequence for them leaving.
The only consequence is they could have been further down the road and now they're right back where they left off. That's the only thing. Right. As far as that goes, right. Now, let's suppose that you're, a level 2 son and then you throw in the towel. You have a lot more to throw away.
More consequence.
Yeah. A lot more to throw away. That'd be a shame, wouldn't it? By the way, a level 2 son, I just don't see a level 2 son throwing it away. He's already been through the roughest part. The biggest part is the bluff. I call it a bluff. When you're inexperienced, look, the sight of the other army is the scariest the first time you ever walk out onto the field. Once you've been through the first few battles and you kind of get your wits about you, you go, that's not as scary as... Remember in Vietnam when they used to fly the helicopters and they'd blare that music out of loudspeakers as they were coming? You know what that was meant to do? That was meant to frighten the other folks. That's what, there's a lot of bluster that takes place at the beginning. But the truth is, the very first attacks against you can only go so far. They can only go to where you've been educated. In other words, Satan can't liken it to a test. You can't be tested on anything you haven't already been instructed in. That makes sense? Your Father's got to teach you about it, and only after you've got it, then He gives the green light to the adversary. Now you can go to here, because they're equipped to handle that. That's got to be frustrating to Satan, because he wants to top you out. He wants to take you beyond what you're educated to handle, and God won't allow him to do that. Okay. Thank you for staying awake in the second section. And no ice cream next week.